Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, the 28th of January, and today we are learning to use a range of parentheses to add additional information. So you'll do now today is to make the corrections to the sentences below. Now, you will notice that we do have inverted commas. We won't be using inverted commas in our advice letters, but I really wanted to make sure that it was still keeping our speech punctuation and understanding of how to punctuate it nice and sharp. So we've got our sentences here. Martin exclaimed, "Come back with our ball." "It's ours now," replied Samantha. Pause the video here whilst you copy up the sentences and add in the correct punctuation, and press play once you're ready to see how you did. Right then, so let's see how we got on then. So we can see that we have Martin exclaimed, "Come back with our ball." So the first part of it is fine. So if I just get my pen ready here. So I'm going to use these lines here. This might have been a bit of a clue as to what I was expecting. So Martin. And then we can see that exclaimed is being misspelled. So E-X-C-L-I-M-E-D at the end. Martin exclaimed. Then we need a comma and then inverted commas. Capital letter. Come back with, and not our ball, our ball, O-U-R. Full stop, inverted commas. Then we need a new speaker on a new line. So it shouldn't have carried on, it should have gone underneath, inverted commas, it. But because it's it is, we need an apostrophe. Ours now, comma, inverted commas, replied, I-E-D at the end, then Samantha. Full stop, cross that T. So if I'm having a look at this, these are the things that you should have looked out for. So the spelling there, ED on the end. We should have had a comma. You should have had a capital C for come. Come back with our ball. So that should have been corrected here too. You should have had a new speaker on a new line, an apostrophe in its, a comma here, and the spelling of replied. So if you missed out any of those corrections, please pause the video here and make those final adjustments. If you're ready to continue, then please carry on watching. So in this lesson, we are looking at parenthesis. Parenthesis adds extra information to a sentence or a paragraph, but the passage should still make sense without it. Really vital that you remember that rule today. And so far in Year 5, we focused really on using brackets for parenthesis, and there's two examples here that should look familiar to you. Sanjay, age 10, is an accomplished guitarist even, sorry. And then we've got the additional information, age 10, in the brackets. And then later that day, I met Bianca, parenthesis, my best friend. So again, the parenthesis adding on about the noun Bianca, and this one describing the noun Sanjay. So in this lesson, we're not only going to be using brackets, which are these, which you are familiar with using. We're going to be looking at how we use commas for parenthesis. And then this is a new type of punctuation for most of you. These are dashes here. And they all really work in the same way. And they are somewhat interchangeable. They add relevant detail or they clarify information, and they, depending on the placement, may be used in pairs all the time or sometimes just one on their own. And I'll go through each punctuation type and those rules. But again, big red letters, it's vital that the rest of the sentence must make grammatical sense on its own for the parenthesis to work. So, recapping brackets. So brackets are the most common type of parenthesis, and they always come in pairs. You never get one on their own. So some examples here. As a last resort, and I mean as a last resort, you could run off with their shoes. We've got a dog here with a shoe in his mouth. And then Fluffy, a cat from Shropshire, claimed this worked brilliantly well. So nothing too intimidating, I hope. We're used to using the brackets by now. Most common type, but you will see, you will always have them in pairs. You never get one on its own. They always come together. So then commas. So commas are quite common. and they are considered to be the most formal form of parenthesis. That's not to say that you can't find an appropriate part of your letter to use commas, but they will work best with formal texts rather than dashes particularly. Commas, however, may come alone, but they tend to come in pairs. So one example here, Shadow, a famous cat escape artist, has shared many tricks. And then we have what Shadow might be doing to escape. And we can see here that this one is a pair of commas. And it's almost like a relative clause. I'll get onto that in a second, this big chunk of information here, just to remind me to give you a reminder as well. And finally, my last suggestion, the one I am most confident about, is guaranteed to work. So you can see here another pair of commas giving information about the noun, the suggestion. This here about the noun shadow. So you can see a pattern with where the parenthesis appears. It usually follows a noun. It might not always, but that is a good place to start if you're adding it in yourself. What I did want to add in, though, is that relative clauses are also examples of parenthesis with commas, and you will often see, even within brackets, the pronoun, the relative pronoun, which or who. So don't be put off by that. You might find that quite helpful today, but just be aware that you can still use commas without the relative pronoun. So here, I could have added in who is a famous cat escape artist, but it really works without it, okay? If in doubt, if you feel more comfortable with relative clauses, then that's fine. However, this type of parenthesis with the commas sometimes is called an embedded clause or a dependent clause. Just so that looks a little bit more familiar. And dashes, I really enjoy using dashes in writing, but they're not very formal. They're quite informal, which means it's perfect for this letter. And when later in the year, you're going to be writing another letter, which is an informal letter. So they really do work well. They indicate a stronger break in thought. So when you want to make a really hard-hitting point or emphasize something, they're really effective then. They too can come alone as well, and you might find them tagged on the end of a sentence. We're actually going to have a look at that later specifically. But dashes, really good for when it's a further step away from the main point, when it's when you just want to have a lot of punch to what you're saying. So here, my last solution, my riskiest one, is sure to get your owner's attention, and you can almost see it actually standing out more, my riskiest one. Now, that one would fit well because you really want to make sure the reader knows that it is risky. These two could have been punctuated with brackets, but this works quite well with dashes. And this one here, with my advice, you'll find success, even if it is extreme. And we've got a dash just to tag on a bit of information here about the success. So that's just an example of how it can be on the end too, just on its own. So dashes, hopefully I'll have fun with those today. So just really quickly, quick questions. You don't have to write these down, just say them out loud or think them to yourself. Question 1, what is the most common type of parenthesis? Well done if you said brackets. Question 2, what is the most formal type of parenthesis? Think fast. Commas. And finally, which parenthesis type gives the most emphasis? That one is dashes. Well done if you got that. So part 1 of our lesson is really looking at how to use parenthesis punctuation accurately. So this is what your first independent activity is going to look like. I'm going to go through some examples with you to show you how you can answer these questions. So if I just make this a bit thicker, yeah, it should be fine. Okay, so what we need to remember is that the additional information must be relevant to the sentence. So it must make sense. It must be contributing something worthwhile and not just random information that just is redundant. And the original sentence must also still make sense. Really, really vital we remember that. Even if it helps you to actually cover up the parenthesis and see that it still makes sense. If you have to physically do that, then that helps you, then great. It's really important that you can identify that today. So if we have a look here, which of these sentences are punctuated correctly? Explain your answer. So what I'm actually going to do is cover the parenthesis, as I've said, just to see. So my solutions, which are proven to work, must be tried. I can see that I've got a pair of commas here. So if I was to cover this up and read the sentence again, my solutions must be tried. Yeah, that makes sense. And I would say that this is relevant information because it's reinforcing that my techniques are reliable. So I'm going to answer here yes, and then basically say that. So the main clause makes sense, and the information run out of room, sorry. Information is relevant. Okay, I'm happy with that. So let's look at the second sentence here, B. So I have some advice for you. Now I've got brackets this time. The brackets goes around one word, which sometimes is fine. And then even if you remove that word, the sentence should still make sense. But here we've got, I have some for you. Somewhat. I don't know what. I've not got a noun. So somewhat. So I know that that one doesn't make sense purely because it's failed on this really important second rule. No. And that's because the main clause needs the information in the parenthesis. Really haven't given myself enough room here, sorry. To make sense. Okay. Have a look at this the third one, sorry. I have so many suggestions, such as meowing loudly, that you could try. Have a little pause now. You might even want to cover it up on your screen with your fingers or your hands and see, does the main clause make sense? Is the information relevant? Have a think to yourself. Well, I think that it is. Yes, because it is relevant information and the main clause makes sense. Good. Oh, sorry, my E there. Wonderful. So let's move on to your first task then. So on your piece of paper, what I'd like you to do is you can underline or you can put independent one. I don't mind really, as long as it's just clear to you and on the sheet what you're answering. You're going to look at these three sentences here. Which of these sentences are punctuated correctly and why? So A, you can put A in the margin and then read it. So as a last resort, and I mean as a last resort, you could try hiding their purse. Do you think that this parenthesis has been used correctly? Do you think if you were to remove it, your sentence would make grammatical sense? If you think yes, put yes and explain why. If you think no, then put no and explain why. The same for B. Your problem, which is experienced by many pets, is fixable. Again, do you think the parenthesis is punctuated correctly? Say yes or no, and then explain why. And then thirdly, it sounds extreme, but it should work. So pause the video here whilst you answer those three questions. It should only take you a couple of minutes, and then press play once you're ready to see how we got on. Well done. So we can see our answers here. So this first one, no. As a last resort should also be included as it doesn't make grammatical sense if it isn't separated from the main clause. For B, yes, because it adds relevant detail and the original sentence makes sense. And C, no, you need to put the part in parenthesis for the sentence to make sense. Sorry, you need the part in parenthesis for the sentence to make sense. It's not being accurately punctuated. If you got any of those incorrect, just pause the video once again while you just edit your answers, but I am going to continue with the rest of the lesson. Adding the correct punctuation. So I'm going to model this one as well. So now we can identify when the punctuation is being used incorrectly. I think it's easy to start with that one. Now let's look at actually adding in the parenthesis punctuation ourselves. So remember, tell me, what are the 3 different types we're looking at today? And I'll write them down. So what's the most common? Brackets. What's the most formal? Commas. What gives the most emphasis and most informal? Dashes. So I might use pink actually. I've got my first sentence. Eddie, a bald eagle from Basildon, reported that this technique was very effective. So when I want to identify what is the parenthesis, what is the extra information? So my sentence is about Eddie, that's my subject, so I need Eddie. A bald eagle from Basildon. That's sounding likely that this is my extra information. Reported that this technique was very effective. So I have my subject and I have my verb here. So I know that these parts are definitely part of the main clause, which means that this section is likely to be my parenthesis. If I was to get rid of this, Eddie reported that this technique was very effective, then that sentence still makes sense, okay? So I'm just going to, get rid of that again. And I know that this is my parenthesis. I could use any of them. I think brackets would work well here. I think that's quite likely to have brackets around it. Maybe not the dashes. I don't think that needs to be emphasized. And it's also relevant information because we're saying who Eddie is. B, I have helped so many pets with their worries, over 100 in total. Interesting one here. So we've got I, so subject here, helped is the verb. So it means that something around this section is going to be my extra information. I have helped so many pets with their worries. If I was to put a full stop here, that would make sense. Over 100 in total is extra information. If I was to use a comma, then it would seem like a comma splice. So I don't want to use a comma. For me, this is definitely where you would use a dash. And C, your letter, which outlined your predicament, made me feel terribly sad. Now, hopefully you spotted this relative pronoun here. So I wonder if you can tell me where my punctuation needs to go. Good. Since we've used brackets and a dash, I think commas should be used on this one. So I want to use a comma here. Hopefully you spotted this using your relative clause knowledge. Your letter, which outlined your predicament, made me feel terribly sad. If I was to remove this, then your letter made me feel terribly sad would make sense. So your next activity here is to punctuate the sentences. What I would like you to do underneath the work you've completed so far is to put the numbers of the sentences in the margin, write the sentences out, including the relevant punctuation. So remember the most common, brackets, we have commas, and we have dashes. Remember, this one's good for emphasis, okay? So pause the video here while you complete this activity, writing the sentences out with the relevant punctuation in the correct place, and press play once you're ready. Okay, so then we can see we have our answers here. So I asked a colleague, parsnip. Parsnip is the extra information. Parsnip is the colleague. So I've used brackets around this one. If you had commas around that one, I think that would be okay. If you had dashes, it's technically accurate, but I think maybe not for emphasis. I think one of the other two would work better. Make sure to jump in a puddle, the muddiest one you could find to really annoy them. I used dashes on that one. I think I wanted to emphasize that point. If you had brackets or commas, I think that one would be okay as well. Your owner, he will be so upset, will never do that again. You could have used any of them, but I've used commas here around this section. And then finally at the bottom, I think a dash works really well for tagging that on at the end. I was once forced to eat a bowl of cabbage. I hated it. So pause the video here if you did get any of those incorrect, but please continue watching if you are ready to proceed with the rest of the lesson. So our second part here, where to actually put the parenthesis if we're starting with a simple sentence and we've not got any in it at the moment. So really looking at editing sentences now. So just to cover this, Some of this I've already touched upon, but just to make it really clear, there are two places where you can really put parenthesis. What I'm calling mid-sentence parenthesis, so near the beginning or in the middle of a sentence, usually after a noun or maybe the subject. It's commonly found around this area. So relative clauses or embedded clauses tend to appear in this area. But remember, the same rules still apply, and it should still link to the original sentence. So we can see here, my friends, Norman and Fiona, shared their sweets with me. That one is correct. And we are describing, we are giving extra information to the friends, okay? This one is incorrect, because even though it's in the middle of a sentence, this part here means my friend's sweets with me. Doesn't make any sense. So this is what I'm calling mid-sentence parenthesis, basically when it doesn't appear at the end of the sentence. So if we take a look at these examples here, mid-sentence parenthesis, can we add mid-sentence parenthesis to these sentences? So if I have a look at this sentence, Rover is great at giving more advice. Well, Rover's the subject of the sentence and a noun in the sentence, so I think that's a good option for us to use parenthesis about Rover. And I think it would also be relevant to the reader to know who Rover is and why I've mentioned him. So Rover, I might use brackets for this one. Rover may be a good friend of mine. Is great at giving. To be honest, I did mean to get rid of the word more. I don't know why I used it. Giving advice. So I just crossed that out and pretend that it wasn't there. Great at giving advice. And then I've got my parenthesis and it makes sense. Children love seeing their pets do tricks. So I might want to add some extra information here. So again, children, the first word in the sentence, the subject of a sentence, I might add a bit more here. Children, and just to make it more informal, maybe I could use brackets again. Actually, no, I'm going to use dashes because I'm going to add in and adults too. Or maybe and especially adults. So I've not given myself enough lines again, I am sorry. And especially adults love seeing their pets do tricks, full stop. Okay, so I've added in some parenthesis in the middle of a sentence, tried to use a range of it as well, tried to vary it up so I'm not relying on the same techniques every time to add in some extra information to those sentences. So your task now, please pause the video on this page. You're going to write out 3 sentences here and you're going to add in some mid-sentence parenthesis. Remember, for reference, I'll put them on again. Brackets, commas, dashes. A, the last letter I received described a similar issue. B, the food they serve you sounds terrible. And C, your owner needs to try harder to keep you happy. So pause the video here, write the sentences up, and then press play once you're ready to resume. Well done. So I've not put answers up for that one because really we need to see your own ideas and there are so many different options you could have gone for that really it would be very difficult to and very time consuming in terms of you watching back a video to see all the possible different ideas. And I couldn't possibly imagine all of your creative ideas anyway. So we're going to move on, but please make sure you upload that one to Seesaw so an adult can get back to you. So end of sentence parenthesis. We are nearly at the end of a lesson, so keep on going. Really important, this one, because I think it can add a lot of flair to your writing. So the rules when using this are the same. So the main clause needs to make sense and the information has to be relevant. But parenthesis using a dash to add information at the end of a sentence, as I've said, adds impact when reading. It works well when exaggerating information, it adds emphasis, it gives a punchier end, and works really well to make offhand remarks and comments. So that's the kind of flair that we'd be expecting to see in a letter like this, a kind of your own opinion bursting out a little bit more, and it works really well with dashes. So some examples here. I can't believe they rolled their eyes. So rude. The howling pain will give them a headache. The howling sound will give them a headache. A genius plan. So again, just a dash connecting on the parenthesis at the end of a sentence. So more of an opinion, a bit of a remark at the end. So if we're to have a look here, end of sentence parenthesis, how can I add an example using a dash for emphasis at the end of these sentences? So you'll notice I've not put full stops on them. I think I have left them on the next slide. So just take them away and put them on again at the end. Things will get better soon. So really what instantly comes to mind for me is saying something like, I promise, because you're emphasizing that things will get better to the reader. So I'm going to write that again because I missed out the I. I promise, but you might even have it will. Things will get better soon. And I think that just fits perfectly. I promise. B, I also despise getting my feet wet. And I think here an opinion-based dash would work really well. I wonder what you can think of to go at the end of this one. Have a think now. And we'll see if we've got a similar idea. So I'm going to use a dash. I also despise getting my feet wet. And maybe something like it's terrible or something like that. So you can be simple with what you're saying, remembering the full stop at the end. So what your task is now, pause the video on this page. You're going to include some end of sentence parenthesis. So you've got your sentences here. I was shocked when I read they make fun of you, sorry. B, you won't have to eat any more of that awful slop, or my advice is guaranteed to work. And you're going to use a dash at the end, a dash on this one to add maybe brackets, but I think it would work well for you to use a dash since it's new on the end of these sentences. Okay, so pause the video here and press play, then we can I'll show you a challenge and then you have a plenary as well to pull together our understanding. Great job. Please make sure to upload that onto Seesaw. So your challenge today, if you wish to complete this, so if you've finished your work early or you feel like you're getting into a lesson, you want to practice more, is to write some informal sentences that could be included in an advice letter addressing the issues. So kind of in the style that I've been giving you so far, they're all sentences that we could reuse or rework slightly in the genre that we're writing. So I've got three problems for you to think about. So I've got a dog who dislikes going on long walks. We've got an animal who's been teased by others, and I thought this one would be quite cute. A duck that can't swim, and what advice would you give them to help them out? So really interested to see what ideas we've got. This is optional if you want to do this, but again, if you're looking to spark a lot of creative ideas and practice that new punctuation, then I would recommend doing this. So if you are finished for today, then we have our plenary just to pull our understanding together. So I want you to, again, tell me what are the 3 types of parentheses that you can use. And secondly, is this an accurate sentence? Is it punctuated correctly? All right then, thank you so much for your time today. Lots of new skills that we're learning, both in maths and in writing. So keep up all the hard work, and I look forward to catching up with you tomorrow for our next writing lesson. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.